Um, I consider my yard an ongoing experiment. I don't think it will ever be done. And in a way, I'm glad about that. I don't have any pressure to hit a certain point and everything's going to be perfect. I can just have it continue as a continuing work, a work in progress. I want to give credit to Gardening Volunteers of South Texas for really every step of my progress. Through the Gardening Essentials classes, the speakers gave me a lot of great information. And we'd have a question and answer period after they talk. And so I could get information that way. I could even talk to the speaker afterwards. And I learned a lot from that. And also, we have a couple of other programs that are very helpful. The Water Saver Landscape Tour, which happens either in spring or fall, once a year, and our landscape design classes, which occur about 3 times a year. And we will be in touch about when the next one will be. But both of those just have a lot of great information that has been very helpful to me. The house on the left here, upper left, is my neighbor's house. And the yard is very neat. It's pretty much all grass. There's a few shrubs and trees, but by and large, you would look at it and say, you know, it's a lawn. And while that is the norm, probably in San Antonio still, I find it very boring. So when I got the house and as I told you, it was a blank slate, just all grass and a couple of trees. I thought that it would be exciting to revamp the whole thing. I started, as you will see in the picture on the right, just, you know, making beds going up to the entryway between the driveway and the entry, because I figured that was the place people would see the most, and it was right by the hose and so, or the faucet. Then I branched out because what I wanted was the scene at the bottom. That's kind of where I am now, and I wanted to have the entire yard be a xeriscape, no lawn. And I was able to achieve that. What were the advantages of this? Well, the mower and the weed eater stay in the garage, and as you can see, they can't escape. Conservation was a big issue for me. Gardening Volunteers of South Texas is all about conservation. Our main mission is to teach people about saving water in their landscapes. So I felt it important to do my own part, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. I also enjoy butterflies, bees, and birds. And one of the speakers said to us that turf grass does not feed any wildlife. It's plants with nectar that do that. And so, since I want to keep enjoying those species, I wanted to be able to feed them with my plants. Also, I'm a person who sits and reads a lot. And I thought, you know, gardening is going to get me outside in the fresh air, getting lots of exercise. And indeed it has. So there are 7 must-haves to have a xeric landscape. And I'm going to talk to you about how I incorporated those into my 13-year project. So first, you've got to have sound planning and design. You know, this is a little sketch on the left that I did for a garden at church. You know, it's rudimentary. You don't have to have fancy software. You just have to have measurements about where things are so that you can plan your beds around them. Second is limited turf. This doesn't mean no turf, but it means limiting your turf to about 30% or less of your yard. 3 is water efficient plants. You obviously are going to have 70% of your ground left that you can use for plants, patios, paths. And so you're going to want to use plants that will take very little water. Soil improvement is number 4, and that has to do with helping the plants take up water efficiently. Number 5, using mulch is important, and in this picture, this was one of the early days of my project. I was found and determined to use just about every kind of mulch. I have colored mulch, dyed mulch, river rock, flagstone, you name it, I got it. Proper upkeep is another important issue, especially when you're in an area with mostly yards. People expect to see something that is tailored, you know, that it looks simple and attractive. And if you've got a lot of plants all dotting your landscape, they really need to be kept pruned, and the weeds need to be pulled, and so that people believe that this is an asset to the neighborhood and not not a deterrent. Number 7 is efficient irrigation. And while there are all kinds of water saving means of irrigation, such as drip, I only hand water. And that's really the only thing that I can speak with authority about. So that's what we're going to talk about. All right, so now we'll just kind of delve into these a little deeper. Design just has to be your first step, because you're going to be putting a lot of effort and money and time into your landscape. And you want it to turn out well. You just, without a plan, you're just in danger of having a hodgepodge, you know, going to the nursery and saying, boy, I really like the way that plant would look, and putting it in somewhere, and just continuing to do that. And you need to think about how you want your yard to function. If you want a patio, for instance, for entertaining, if you want paths so that you can not be walking on mulch, and you can easily drag a hose or a cart, wheelbarrow, then you need to set aside specific places for those things to occur. I was telling you in the beginning about our landscape design school. This, I think, is a very good starting place if you are thinking about taking out some of your grass and putting in some flower beds, shrubs and grasses. It doesn't just have to be flowers. The price is only $30, and that really just covers the cost of the materials that we provide. And I'll be showing you some of those materials. But you can see in this picture on the left, you know, this woman has brought pictures of her landscape for a one-on-one consultation with one of our members who is an experienced gardener, so that she can get some feedback about what to do. Sometimes people bring pictures on their phone, or sometimes they even sketch their yard. But it is a really good opportunity to get not only some classroom knowledge, but to get that one-on-one personal attention. So I think everybody gets their inspiration from somewhere. I mean, I'm sure that there are a lot of good, just naturally occurring ideas, but at least for me, I can't count on a brainstorm. So I keep my eyes open for things that I could copy. And I had gone to a doctor's appointment in this building, and I looked at this. It's a long bed that extends the entire width of the building. And I really liked the way it showcased the plants, the way there was some variety in the ground cover. You had mulch, you had river rock, you had these flagstones that provided a nice edge. And I just, it was just very appealing to me. And I thought, I might just try that on a bigger scale in my yard. Well, my adaptation, it worked to a point. I created several large beds that were bordered by flagstone, and you can see in both of these pictures how that worked. I used different mulches to create contrast between beds. But over time, some unfortunate things happened, which is life, isn't it? Weeds, for instance, as you see in the upper right, just came out of nowhere. You know, one day things would look pretty good, and it seemed like a week later, you know, the bed was just overgrown. And the shrubs also got larger, and they ended up, in some cases, obscuring some of the look that I was going for. The other thing is that I needed to move around my yard a lot. I have to have a 100-foot hose in order to cover the entire front yard. I'm on a corner, and dragging that hose over the flagstone presented some real issues. It would catch on the edges of the stones, and then I'd have to go back and pull it out. The flagstones were not, you know, seated to be a walkway. They were really just more for viewing. And so those were not really stable, and I was tripping a good bit. So one of the early things I did was to put in wide paths that had a stable foundation of sand and pea gravel. And these paths, I just had 3 of them, but they connected my driveway and sidewalks and patios with a walkway, as well as the water faucet. So everything can be reached by using a path and then just having to walk in a little ways on the bark mulch. And you will see that I also don't have many rocks showing in this picture. I decided that I might have a more uniform look and covered up the rocks with one color of mulch. The idea that looked so good in the doctor's building was just too busy when it was done on a big scale in my yard. This is a case though where I think this idea really does work well. Now, of course, they are using the same kind of flagstone all the way through, and the same colors of mulch. Their river rock is really nice river rock, you know, with an attractive coloration and a good size. And I think that had I been able to afford a landscape designer, you know, I might have ended up with a plan that looked something like this. But I had to do it on my own with my own abilities. And this yard was on one of our landscape design tours. And so I was able to talk with the homeowner about how she worked with her landscape designer, and she handles the ongoing maintenance. So she is still very involved in her yard. If your yard slopes, as mine does, you need to plan ways to keep the water on your property where it can help your turf and plants. This is something that I didn't take into consideration enough. I knew that I had to have some way of slowing the water down, but I didn't build in quite enough barriers. And so after a heavy rain, I would often find my gravel or my bark mulch sitting on the sidewalk or in the street, and I'd have to pick it up and put it back. And so something I did this year is to put in this edging that you see curving around near the top of the picture. And then I used the flagstone that I had left over as a place where I could step down and reach all of the bed covered in bigger river rock that seems to stay put better. And then I added another layer of chop block to also help keep everything where it's supposed to be. And I'm pleased with the way it looks and the way it's controlling my erosion. So yeah, this is another view. The metal border is about 4 feet up from the sidewalk, and then all those stones that I talked about, they're reinforcing that metal border, and also just keeping things out of the sidewalk. Now, I knew that John was coming to take pictures that day, and I never did sweep up all that dirt on the sidewalk. And so that's an issue that we'll address in upkeep. And down here, these are this is chop block. So a lot of times people don't know what I mean when I say that, but it's commonly, I'm sure you're going to look at it and say, you've seen this all over, because it's very commonly used in both commercial and residential landscaping. Inferno strips are a prime candidate if you want to convert some of your yard to a xeric bed. Inferno strips got their name from a landscape horticulturist at SAWS named Mark Peterson. And the name suggests what it is, that these are just strips of soil in between a sidewalk and the street that get full sun, a lot of reflected heat off the concrete, and are difficult places to grow grass. And it's kind of a pain, you know, you've got to get the mower over there, and there are different widths. You know, this, as you see in the left picture, is a 4-foot wide Inferno strip, and in the right picture, it's an 8-foot. And that really does tell you, it does a lot to influence your choice of plants. On a 4-foot wide strip, you really can only have one row of plants, kind of all lined up, because you need them to be in the middle. So you got a couple feet on each side for your branches and foliage. And so I found that, for instance, this bush with the yellow flowers here on the left, that bush shouldn't be there. You know, I did not anticipate it getting to be as tall as it is. And it becomes a hazard, since I'm on a corner. If a driver is at the stop sign and looks right, he can't really see the cars coming very well, because that bush is blocking his line of vision. This front Inferno strip that's 8 feet wide is a lot easier to plant, because I can have 2 rows of plants basically, and they don't have to be all lined up. I can just kind of, you know, have a nice curving kind of path to the plants, and I can use bigger plants. I'm not constrained to something that's only 4 feet wide. This is one of my favorite yards of our landscape design tours over the years. The entire yard is a xeriscape. You've got no grass. What I liked about this yard is that it really exemplifies a landscape practice that is commonly used, called mounds and spikes. So you're basically combining in your bed some plants that have a mounding growth pattern, and plants that have tall, narrow, upright kind of a pattern. And it adds interest, as does a variety of colors and sizes, textures. And so those are things that you also want to think of when you're designing a bed, is to have each bed, you know, kind of meet all those criteria. Okay, secondly, a xeriscape has to have limited or no turf grass. By limited, we mean 30% grass or less. That's the standard that we use in our landscape tour yards, and one that SAWS has adopted. So you can have a pretty traditional looking landscape with 30% grass. This homeowner, this yard was also on a tour, and he really did a lovely job. He's got, I don't remember, like 25 different varieties of plants in his front yard, and yet it doesn't look cluttered. And having just the solid turf grass in front is a nice contrast. And I think it looks quite restful. The other thing to me that stands out about this yard is that there's a lot of big, tall oak trees. So this yard is a xeriscape that needs shade plants, which is unusual. Most of the plants that really will do well in hot, dry conditions, like we have in San Antonio, are sun-loving plants. But he managed to find, this man is a very enthusiastic gardener. He managed to find a nice variety, like I said, a lot of different types of plants that all can take shade. This is another example of a home in a neighborhood with a lot of conventional turf landscapes. So they wanted it to fit in, but they also wanted to conserve water. So they put in these very large curving beds that I think look very attractive. They've got bark and they've got rock, and they've separated them with chop block. But I think what's most appealing about it, well, partly that it's very neat. You know, they are staying on top of their weeds, either with chemicals or by hand pulling, and that they've got green around them, so it doesn't look like some kind of desert scape. And they've also got these beautiful oak trees, which give them some shade and some additional interest. So I just thought that was another really good use of mulch left unplanted. And this is my yard, so you can, this is the no grass at all variety of xeriscape, which you can do if it fits the neighborhood, as it does in mine, and meets any HOA requirements that you have. I've been told that it's possible to get an HOA to approve a xeriscape if you can bring them your design, your plans, a plant list, so that they can see that this is not going to be something that's just going to look like a lot of weeds, but that it's something that really will be an asset to the neighborhood. Okay, this was my front yard in 2010, so 3 years after I moved in, but 10 years ago. And I had killed all the grass. I worked in sections, covered it with black plastic. Now this picture that you see in the bottom right here, this is landscape cloth, but it looked a lot like that. I used black plastic because I didn't want to see the dead grass through a clear plastic. And I thought it just looked more tasteful. So I had that plastic on for probably 4 months because I put it on in the late fall. And so I didn't have hot temperatures speeding things along. So in the spring, I uncovered it and voila, dead Bermuda. It was a little St. Augustine mixed in. So I wanted it to look, you know, like soil. I mean, something that you could easily dig into. So on the upper right, you see what it looked like after I tilled. Bought a tiller and tilled all that grass into the soil, thinking that would enrich the soil, and loosened everything up. I was very proud of myself. Well, about maybe 2 or 3 months, took a little while. Every weed under the sun sprouted in these tilled areas. And when I mentioned this at a GVST meeting to someone more experienced than I, he said, "You did what? You tilled that soil?" He says, "That soil has been there untouched for years. And now you go in there with a tiller and you turn everything around." And he said, "You've now brought up all these old weed seeds that did not sprout because they weren't getting sunlight and air and water, not much water anyway." So my advice to you, if you decide to do something like this for a bed or for your whole yard, don't till. Just leave those seeds alone down there. It's good to use, a trowel and loosen things up some, but you don't want to do any heavy duty tilling. And this kind of yellowish stuff that's sitting on top of my weed cloth there is base material that I was told I should lay down before I put my river rock on top of it. So I did hire some help here because this river rock, well, first you can see the pile of base material. That isn't too heavy. But then out of sight, you've got another huge pile of river rock. And you have to haul that uphill to spread it. And that was a bridge too far for me. So those guys came in, obviously. They enjoy attention. And I had to cut, you can see in this picture on the left, I had to cut some holes in the cloth where I had already put in some shrubs and perennials because I wanted to get them in early in spring. And then we put down the other materials over the ground cloth. Just a quick note about ground cloth. I don't recommend it. Every time you want to put a plant in where there wasn't one before, you're going to put your shovel in the ground and run into the ground cloth. So then you're going to have to pull your rocks or bark or whatever aside, and you're going to have to cut out the weed cloth to allow a big enough hole to put your plant in. And frankly, weed seeds, they can germinate right on top of that cloth. So I really see that as a step that you can avoid and a cost that you can not have to bear. All right, so this is kind of what it looked like then. I think this was maybe 2015. So you can see that, the plants are maturing and I must have weeded quite shortly before I took these pictures because it doesn't really look too bad. Well, that you can see like in the Inferno strip, all that little stuff. That just multiplies like crazy. Okay, well, now we're going to talk about water efficient plants. And this is really important because this is going to determine how little you can get away with watering. You can see if you've got beds in far-flung areas of your yard or a whole yard, as I do, you're going to be hauling this hose all over, and the hose gets heavy. And the whole idea of this is to save water. So you really want to choose your plants carefully. Think about this when you go out to the nursery. How far will my new plant be from the nearest faucet? If you're putting in an inferno strip that's on the other side of the lot from your faucet, you're going to have a long hose, and you're going to have to drag it over there to water the new plant. So you want to put, if you're going to buy anything that does need more water, you want to put it right up front where the hose, or wherever the hose is, so it's not so hard to water. But ideally, I try to keep everything in the little or no water category, because I don't want to have to think about, oh, here, this plant, I need to give a lot more water to than these other ones. The other things you need to know before shopping, well, if the plant uses little water, if that's your goal, then that, to me, is the most important criteria. If it's the prettiest plant in the world and it just guzzles water, I don't want it. You need to know if it's going to be in sun or shade. Now, I have very little shade in my yard, so that's an easy one. But many people do have a combination of sun or shade, and you need to know where that sun is in the heat of the day. So late afternoon, early evening in the summer. A plant that needs part shade is not going to be able to handle full sun during those hours. You want to know if your soil drains well. I go to Rainbow Gardens, not giving them a plug, but I can tell you that they have information cards at every plant so that you can see, it'll tell you things like needs well-drained soil or can tolerate poor dense soil or clay soil. That you want to take those things very seriously. You want to know the mature size of the plant. You could see that in some cases I had not counted on my plants getting that big, and they got too close to each other, and then you've got to prune more. Is the plant evergreen? I try to keep in every planted area, which I will call a room or a bed. You want to keep a few plants in there, well, depending on the size of it, but some plants that are evergreen, so that when you get to this time of the year, you got something of color in the bed. It's nice to have a mix, because if you want flowers, then most of those plants are deciduous, and so meaning they drop their leaves. So if you've got a mix, then you're kind of covered for all seasons. If it does bloom, when does it bloom, and what color are the flowers? If you're looking specifically for a yellow plant, well, then there's no point in scanning, you know, all the other, and Rainbow does tend to group things by color, the perennials, well, even the annuals. Well, now the annuals are kind of more mixed up, but the point is, it's going to help you to keep that in mind so that you're not seduced by this great red plant, and then you get it home and you go, oh yeah, that really doesn't look very good. Mm-hmm. Is the plant mounding or spiky? And if it's susceptible to disease, you certainly want to know that, and I avoid anything like that because I don't want to have to spray or lose the plant. Or insects, again, a spraying problem, or deer. That's become a real issue in my neighborhood, and I know it is for lots of neighborhoods around town. And honestly, I just don't plant many annuals anymore because they love those. A lot of my native and adapted plants don't interest them, and I've not had much damage. If I could have done a screen capture, that's what you would see here, but I'm not all that facile with technology, so this just tells you that there is some really good resources, and the one I like the best is a program that enables you to pick the characteristics of a plant that you would like. I like something yellow, and I don't want it to be large. You know, I want it to be small or medium, and I want it to be a native. Well, you plug those things into this and it'll give you a list of plant options, which is great. To get to this though, I found a bit difficult. So when you're on the SAWS homepage, you got to go to the top menu bar and find resources and then pull that down to get to conservation. Okay, then when you have gotten to the conservation homepage, there's a long list of things on the left, and you need to choose garden style San Antonio. When you get to that page, you're going to see a list of 4 choices on the right, and the one that you want, if you want to use that database, is called Find a Plant. Another really good source is a booklet that we give out at our landscape design school called Native and Adapted Landscape Plants. And it's put out by the city of Austin. And this is the book that I probably use the most. I need to have this book with me, you know, when I'm sitting down to sketch out a bed. Here's the kind of information they'll give you. It's all in a table. Tables are wonderful. You can learn so much with so little space. So the plants, first they give you the plant's common name and its botanical name. Then they tell you if it's a Texas native, how tall it gets, how wide it gets, what kind of light it needs, whether it's evergreen or deciduous, or if it's SE, that's semi-evergreen. When is it going to flower? Or put berries on or whatever. And when, what color will those be? It tells you water. Okay, so for me, I will not look at plants that are medium or high. In fact, I don't even think they have any high water plants in here. But what I'm looking for are the L's and the VLs, very low water. So I just don't let myself be tempted by the other stuff. I just go to this column first And then I check out the plants that are in that category. It tells you whether these plants are valuable to wildlife, whether they help wildlife. And then you get comments and maintenance tips. And that is so helpful. And I've not found any of these things to be incorrect. So I can count on what the table tells me. And if you do want to buy the book yourself, it's available at nurseries, and I think it's like $3 or maybe $5, but it's a money well spent. The other book I really depend on is The Best of Texas Landscape Guide. Now, I'm told that this is not the latest version. So if you're going to look for one, you may see one with a different cover, but it will still say Best of Texas Landscape Guide. And it's put out by TNLA, which is the Texas Nursery and Landscape Association. And here's the kind of thing that you find in it. So every plant has a decent picture. And again, it's not a table, but it's got, you know, these icons that tell you, you know, in a flash that it needs, this one needs full sun. It can tolerate partial sun. And it is water, it needs little water. Butterflies like it, deer don't. And then these are all the areas of Texas that this plant will grow in. Then you get a nice description and the size. Now, if it's an evergreen plant, then there is nothing that tells you that. But if it's deciduous, it will tell you in this description, DEC period, and for deciduous. And again, what I found about these numbers is that sometimes they're a little, they're on the low end. My plants will often get bigger than this tells me, but it's certainly a good marker. So these are the 5 plants that I use repeatedly in my yard. I learned that my yard looked better, and I got this from looking at other people's yards and going to the botanical center, and you know that if you've got some repetition, that it really helps to tie the yard together. It gives you cohesion. So, and I wanted to have some different colors, and I wanted to have mounds and spikes. So one of my spikes here is the red yucca in the upper left corner. These, the colorful spikes are there for probably 6 months out of the year. It usually puts them out in spring and again in fall, and they stay up there for a while. Now the deer do like those spikes. They don't eat too much of the yucca, although they've been nibbling on the tips of the green leaves. They call them leaves. But where they really do the most damage is, of course, on the prettiest part of the plant. This large picture is a dwarf nandina called Obsession. There's lots of hybrid nandinas out there, but to me, Obsession is the most attractive. It gives you some really vivid color, and it doesn't spread. At least it hasn't so far for me. Now it's a fairly new plant, so you know we don't know what might happen over time, but so far so good. Down in the right corner, dwarf Yopon holly. Yes, Everybody plants it. Not exciting, but it's a good mounding plant that I almost never have to do anything with. You know, I mean, I might prune it every year or two, but you know, it's a very sturdy plant that you can rely on. In the middle here is Gulf Muley. And this is another, I consider it a spiky plant, even though the leaves are very graceful and don't just go upright. They kind of fall over. And of course, it's show-stopping when it's all in bloom like this, which happens in the fall. But the rest of the year, it still can have kind of tan, I've forgotten the word for it, but, you know, feathery stalks. And even when it doesn't have any stalks, it's a very nice looking, compact plant. And it gives you some really good variety. And then on the left bottom is Henry Dulberg salvia. There are lots of different salvia out there and a lot of different blue salvias, but I like Henry Dulberg the best. It's blue stalks seem to be brighter in color than the others, and they last longer. It is a plant that spreads, and so you do have to, you know, just yank out clumps of it from time to time to keep it from taking over. But at least you can do that. You can just pull it out with your hand usually. I mean, if you do have to dig it, it's not difficult. Those roots are shallow.
Karen, can I ask you a question?
Certainly.
From Marta Castro, she's asking, would you say the red yucca plant is kid-friendly?
Yes, I would, because in fact, it's the only yucca I know of that is not sharp on the tips at all. It's completely soft tipped. I've heard of another yucca that's called soft tip yucca, but I still feel it when I put my finger up against it, but not the red yucca.
We have one other question before you move along, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Marcia Rathbun has asked, how tall is the muley grass? And is there something similar to it that might only get to be a foot tall? Okay, good question. The shortest grass, well, there's a couple of good short grasses out there that are not muley grasses. One of them is Mexican feathergrass, and the other is a pink, yeah, I'll come up with it hopefully, but it's it's pink crystals grass, pink crystals. Neither of these is real hardy. I've had to replace both of them, but I like them enough that I do replace them. And with the Mexican feathergrass, I get babies coming up all over my yard. I had one plant and now I've got about a dozen. But again, they're very shallow rooted. So they're easy to transplant, but they're not terribly long-lived. And the biggest problem with them is that in the beginning, and they're all green, they look great. But after not a long time, they get to be kind of a hay color, and big chunks of it get that color, and if you just tug on them a little bit, they just come loose. So it's easy to to tend to it because you don't need any pruning shears. You can just lop off these big chunks of dead stuff, but it's kind of annoying to have to do that on a, you know, every other week basis because it doesn't look that good when it's got a lot of that dead growth. The pink crystals, or maybe it's ruby crystals. I think there's both, ruby and pink. They are, yeah, they're short. So like Mexican feathergrass gets to be about 18 inches. And I would say that both of those, the pink and the ruby, get to be maybe 2 feet. So I don't know of anything that is really a grass, but is so low that it's only a foot tall. But those, you know, those will not, you know, overwhelm you. They stay in their place. Now this Gulf muley, there's a lot of Gulf muleys, and this one gets to be about 5 feet tall and wide. So I put it in my only 4 foot wide Inferno strip, and I have to prune it regularly. There's another one though called Lindheimer muley, and it's huge. It has different colored fronds coming up, but it's very attractive, and it's as pretty as the Gulf muley, except that it doesn't have the color, but it has the same shape, but it's just a lot bigger. I mean, figure about 7 feet tall and wide for that one. Okay, well, let's move on. I see that I've eaten up almost an hour here, so, but this last half will be shorter. So improving your soil, that's really a big deal when it comes to helping the soil, helping the plants use their water efficiently. So the more organic material that you can add to the soil, the better. You can get it for free if you've got a tree like mine that loses its leaves. This is a Mexican sycamore. And these leaves, you probably wouldn't have to run through the chipper, but certainly oak leaves or anything that's kind of a dense leaf, you'd want to run through the chipper to help it start to break down faster. Compost is a wonderful organic material to use in soils, and manure. And what I like, there's also a combination product out there called composted manure. And that's what I use the most, and I've been very satisfied. If your soil is thin, it's recommended that you stick to the native hill country plants. If you've got at least 4 to 6 inches of good soil, or you've really amended the heck out of it with compost, you can venture into these adapted plants. Like the Nandina is an adapted plant. It's native to Japan. So, you know, I think you're going to be able to have more variety in your garden if you can amend your soil. And as I said, the more organic material, the better. And before I talk about mulch, what I do with this organic material, you know, I certainly don't till, no tilling, but I lay a couple of inches on top of the ground, and then I work it in with a trowel. And I do that, you know, when I'm down there fertilizing or watering, you know, I'm already underneath the plant. It's just easy to do all of these things at the same time and really give your plants some new life. All right, mulch can be organic or inorganic. So bark mulch, which you see here, can be dyed or natural. I've used both, and I'm not thrilled with the dyed mulch. In the beginning, it's kind of a problem because when you like kneel on it, it puts the color in a powdery form on your clothes. Fortunately, it washes out, but yeah, your hands are red, everything, it gets everywhere. And when the sun has hit it for, a few months, it starts to fade, and it's kind of a pinkish color, and the black turns kind of a gray. So I just like to stick with, a brown mulch of some ilk. I go with whatever's cheapest. Cedar mulch is high priced, but because it's a hardwood, it lasts longer. The stuff that you can get free at the brush dump, it is not necessarily real long lasting, but it certainly works fine. And if you get it double cut, it's going to be kind of like this picture in the middle here, kind of it's not really a fine cut, but it's not big chunks of wood, which is what you get if they just run it through once. Then rock is your inorganic mulch, and it can be, pea gravel, it can be this river rock, anything that's covering the soil is really a mulch. See, I didn't have that much to say about mulch. Proper upkeep. Now, as you can see there, I left my errant dirt all over the sidewalk. That is not proper upkeep. It makes the whole thing, it kind of ruins the look of the whole thing. I was exhausted by the time I'd finished working on that strip of rocks, and I had to dig up so that I could put the chop block into the ground some, and it would stay upright. And yeah, it was all I could do just to walk into the house. I didn't care a whit that there was dirt on the sidewalk, but your neighbors will notice. And so you can see it in this other view too, can't you? Yeah. Another person from Saws named Dana, I can always remember her name until I'm, forced to come up with it. Dana had a very good tip, and she said, if you want your yard to look neat, but you don't have time to take care of the whole thing, keep the edges neat. And people are going to assume that all the stuff inside the border, looks as good as this does. And she's right. So that's what I do first. I do my edges first. You get weeds and all these little pieces of chop block and stuff migrates, is rock and bark, and so if you just get everything cleaned and swept, it really makes your yard look well maintained. And especially with the xeriscape, that's important, because with turf grass, if you at least mow it weekly, you're going to have something that looks fairly presentable, unless of course it's overgrown with weeds. But with the xeriscape, you've already got a lot going on there, and people may have a tendency to think that it's kind of wild looking, and so you want to keep it as neat as possible. This is what I use on a regular basis. Bypass pruners up there on the upper left. Now there's also something called anvil pruners. And those, so to bypass, you know, the two sharp pieces, that one goes over the other one. But in anvil, they butt up against each other. And that is really useful for pruning dead branches. I don't do that very often, and so I just keep the bypass pruners. You really need a little landscape knife or a saw like that, because occasionally you run into something that's just bigger than your loppers can handle. You see these two loppers down here. The smaller one on the right can handle up to 2 inches in diameter. The one on the left is something I found out about through our member Veronica Gard, and it's called the Shark. And I tell you, this thing is out of this world. It has a section that you can extend it, extenders, about, I don't know, maybe 1.5 foot. And it's got a ratchet mechanism where the blades are, so that if you're having trouble getting through it, you can just crank it a little less vigorously and the ratchet will engage. And there's almost nothing that I can't cut with the Shark. But if the Shark fails me, I've got my landscape saw there. I like this digger. I know there's a better word for that too, because you know, it's got a little ruler so you can see how far down you're digging, and it's also got serration on both sides, which really helps you dig into our hard soils, or even open a bag. You know, it's very helpful. Then this last item is my garden cart. I hardly see anybody using a garden cart, so I imagine I look kind of funny sitting on one myself, but I'll tell you, it really saves your knees. You can just sit on that, and you can, you know, move around easily, so you're not always having to put all that pressure on your knees. And it holds your tools. It holds my little jar of Osmocote fertilizer, my gloves. So a rag to, you know, wipe the sweat with. It's just a very, it's an invaluable tool for me.
Karen, we have a question from Velia Castillo asking about the color mulch. Would you think that it's okay to use color mulch if you have animals in the yard?
You know, I would Google that and try to find a site that isn't selling the colored mulch, but you know, like a .edu or a .org, someplace that doesn't have a commercial interest. I just don't know whether, it seems like I've heard that it doesn't hurt the plants, but I don't know about animals. Okay, so here's another example of an upkeep problem that is, the weeds are the bane of my existence. You know, my plants can look good, but when they're surrounded by all of these weeds, it just, well, it just ruins the look to me. And it's really not good for the plants either to have for their roots to be competing with all those weed roots. So I try to be selective with my chemicals for the sake of the birds and the bees and the butterflies. But I just can't stay ahead of it if I don't do something. So I listened to a friend who bragged about pre-emergent herbicide, and we've had a number of speakers at GBST meetings who have also talked about how helpful this is. And I would say that, you know, more than 2/3 of my weeds, just they don't come up anymore. I mean, and if you can cut your weed problem down to 30%, you know, I can handle that. I was just, I was so impressed. The thing about it is that you've got to put it down at the right time. And usually there's like a 2-week window in March. And then you do a second application in June. And then you do one in the fall. And I think that window is around Labor Day, when it's still hot. It comes in a bag like fertilizer, you know, these tiny little pellets, and you put it and I put it anyway, in one of those rotary spreaders, like you do fertilizer, and you just walk along up and down, and it throws out a pretty wide strip of herbicide, and you try to overlap those rows a bit so that you're sure you've got everything covered. And then you've got to water it in. And that's the time-consuming part if you've got a lot of property to water like I do. But it is, and it costs a little more than fertilizer does. I think a bag of it, the kind I use, costs about $20. And I need 2 bags to do both my front and back. But it is well worth the cost and the time. Now, it's a chemical. An herbicide is a chemical. But I don't know what the dangers are. And honestly, I don't really want to find out. I want to keep using my herbicide without guilt. Other ongoing maintenance issues are keeping your shrubs that are, not everybody, of course, is at an intersection like I am on a corner, but you want to keep things pruned so that drivers have a clear line of vision. You know, same with, you know, low-hanging tree limbs. I like my chop block edging, which you can see in that picture on the right, because it does make it easy for me to keep the plants off the sidewalk, the driveway. You know, I just cut back everything to, you know, behind the chop block. Like I said, the chop block, though, still gets weeds. And so it's not problem-free, but it does keep your bark under control.
Karen, we have one question to back up just a moment.
Sure.
Kathy Hernandez would like to know if you think it's safe to use herbicides around fruit trees and herbs.
That's another one I don't know. Since I don't have fruit trees and herbs, I've got no experience with that. Again, I would Google, you know, and look for university sites, you know, like Texas A&M, and see what they have to say.
Okay, thanks, Karen.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're to the end finally, and this is short. There's a lot you could talk about with irrigation. You know, you got drip and you got soaker hoses, but I don't use any of that stuff. I just hand water. So since I'm talking to you about my experience, that's what we're going to focus on. Oh, and you can see there's a little green hose. You know, most of these pictures were taken by John. Well, all the good ones were taken by John Bogus, and I just had to fill in with some that I shot with my phone. But what I do is I will just lay the hose down there like that and let it go, you know. I also do have another system, which I'll share with you in a minute. where I'm standing up. But this is awfully easy to do. If you want to prune that shrub at the same time, you can be pruning while the hose is watering, and it's very efficient. So the idea about watering, I don't think I did mention this, but Mark Peterson at SAWS said something in a meeting that just shocked me. He said, if you plant native plants and even most adapted plants, you can limit your watering to 5 to 9 times a year. And I thought, how can that be? Well, partly it's because we get about 30 inches of rain every year. Not this year, unfortunately, but in most years. So in months where we've got, in months where we've gotten maybe an inch of rain, you don't need to water at all. But for the months where you don't, that's where your 5 to 9 times a year comes in. And that's great. If I only have to haul that hose around 5 to 9 times a year, I don't have any problem. The issue is watering deeply when you do water. I see people water quickly, so it's a shallow water, but then they do it, 2 or 3 times a week. Well, in my book, and what the scientists say is better for the plant, that the plant would rather have less frequent, really deep watering, because that's, once they get used to that, then when they, are in that situation naturally, given our climate, they can cope. So what I do to deep water, and I know you're thinking, does she really think that we're so dumb that we need to be told how to water? But I didn't do watering this way at first, but I just learned from listening to speakers. And when I tried it, my plants did much better. So what I do is I clear the ground underneath the plant, which means like you're getting down on the ground with the plant. Pull the weed. This is your time. You can pull the weeds, do a little pruning down there, and then put that hose on and let the water stand for a good minute before soaking in. And then you move the hose clockwise around the perimeter of the plant. And you're putting down the water at the perimeter as well. Don't be watering right at the base of the plant, because the new roots are out there at the ends. After you do this, and what I do is I water 3 plants at a time. So I've done my perimeter watering for plant number 1. And then while it's soaking in, then I go over to plant number 2, do the same thing. And then while it's soaking, I go to plant number 3. Okay. Then I go back, and I do them all again. And then I go back and I do them all a 3rd time. And at this point, people are looking at me and going, are you ever going to finish? And I said, watch this water. And usually I'm not watering until the ground's dry anyway, right? And often it's the 3rd time before the ground isn't just sucking it up as quick as it'll come out of the hose. And so when the water is sitting there for a while, then you can say, all right, it's wet, I can move on. But you really want to soak those plants when you water. Okay, well, that's it. There's my email address, and I'm happy to answer any questions I can.
Karen, we have a question from Kathy Hernandez, and I think I already know the answer for this, but we'll ask you. as the expert today. How do you feel about those gator bags, the green bags that you see in landscapes when they put in a new tree or large shrub that acts as a drip irrigation bag for the plant?
You know, I have to be honest that I've never used them. We've got some at our church on trees that are now 4 years old. And I said to somebody, why do we still have those bags up there? They're not doing anything. So I really don't quite understand how they work or how well they work. My guess is that, you know, the landscapers who planted the trees put them there to give you some kind of assurance that that tree was going to get water even if you forgot, you know, to water it. But I don't know really how well it works or for how long.
I can say from personal experience, for a newly planted tree, they really do work well because it's a low water drip that goes into the ground with no runoff and follows your principles of doing that slow, deep watering method that can be very difficult to do in some situations, given a slope or, you know, ground that's hard and has an easy runoff, those type of situations. So from my experience, those gator bags work quite well.
Well, that's great. Good to know. Does anybody else have a question?
I'm not seeing anything, but I'm seeing kudos from Chris Lopez to you. That says,
oh, well, thank you, Chris. I love compliments.
She actually says, excellent presentation to you, Karen, which I would agree with. Yes, we appreciate the time and effort it took for you to put this together.